Move on. We've been talking about this potential sacking at Real Madrid and whether or not it's true or not. So to find out a little bit more, we thought we might give Graham Hunter, our man in Spain, a quick dial-up. And top of the morning to you, Graham. How are you?
Buenos dias, as we say here in Madrid, in Lopetegui Central.
Yeah, Lopetegui Central. What the hell is going on? Surely they haven't decided that this thing that caused the entire country to fall into paroxysms of whatever during the World Cup, they haven't already decided to pull the plug, have they?
I don't know what the Spanish is for paroxysms, but thank you for using that word at breakfast time. No, I'm not convinced that well, it's not they, it's Florentino Perez. Even if it's benign, it's a dictatorship at Real Madrid. He's all powerful. Nobody can really counsel him against a decision that he takes firmly. I'm not really convinced that he's decided unequivocally to sack Lopetegui. Is Lopetegui in danger? Yes. Is Florentino Perez capable of sacking him now? Yes, definitely. I think there's a dearth of credible candidates. There are people in Madrid urging him to promote Guti from the youth ranks. Antonio Conte, I think, from Madrid's perspective, in a risk assessment exercise, Conte is, whether you say he's available or not, he's on the market. He's probably gettable. And I suspect that if you look around as Florentino Perez, not as analysts like you two, you think, well, what would happen if Mourinho were sacked and Manchester United were to gobble up Antonio Conte? The number of credible candidates to take over from Lopetegui would decrease hugely, not just by one, but in a percentage basis. Probably nearly 100%. And therefore, I don't know factually if Florentino Perez is going to pull the plug. Right now, we know that traditionally it's easier for chairman, owners to act during an international break. Has Lopetegui, results aside, convinced enough people? I'm not convinced about that at all. Does he have a body of support in the media? No, I'm not convinced he does. But Florentino Perez tends to act when he has to, Ger. I disagree with a lot of his ideology and his decision-making, but he does tend to try, and he's a businessman, and therefore, rather than sacking on a whim, it's usually considered. I don't always agree with the way he considers things, but yeah, I'm unconvinced that it's going to happen now. But if it does, there's huge context. He is a hirer and a firer, not a football philosopher.
Just in terms of the state of Real Madrid as a club as a whole at the moment, I was reading a piece on goal.com written by Peter Staunton, who compared the current era at Real Madrid to the post-Alex Ferguson era at Manchester United. So if you take that analogy on one step forward, then I guess Julen Lopetegui is David Moyes.
I don't know why Peter or how Peter came up with this analogy on, and therefore, without attacking it, it's wrong. Simply because to have a post-Alex Ferguson analogy at Real Madrid, you would have to have had a huge body of strategy and acquired intelligence, consistency in the previous, what was Alec there for at Old Trafford? Nearly, what was it, just over a quarter of a century? Now, at Real Madrid, ever since Florentino Perez has taken over, the thinking has only occasionally been more developed than find the best, most marketable player and buy him over and over again. There have been glimpses of light where the comparison is okay, because Zidane, long before he was the coach, was the president's football thinker. He came in and targeted the right players. Varane and Isco are two examples. Persuaded them to join, or persuaded Florentino Perez, in the case of Isco, to sign them. And that's where you can compare with Alex Ferguson, somebody who has native football sense and will use his wisdom over and over again in a strategic, again, I use the word accumulated way. Nobody at Real Madrid over it's now not 18 years because Florentino Perez quit, Calderon took over and immediately appointed a director of football, which is Predrag Mijatovic, during which time they signed Higuain, they signed Marcelo, they signed Capello, they won the title. That was the short spell during which Real Madrid had a Bible of knowledge and experience to fall back upon. And Florentino Perez doesn't work that way. If Peter was talking about the hangover when you've had greatness, that's fine. But the comparison between Zidane and Ferguson might carry some water. The comparison between the two clubs, no chance.
Yeah, like I think maybe there's a comparison to be made in terms of how deep the issues run, that maybe the manager can be seen as kind of an easy option to get rid of, certainly from the outside looking in, when there's clearly other issues at play there. That doesn't mean that the manager is totally absent of blame, of course not. Just kind of looking at that element of things then, like I know you were on the show about this time last year and Nathan was doing the interview and he suggested the possibility that Zinedine Zidane could get sacked from Real Madrid, and I think you laughed particularly hard at that suggestion at the time. But when you look at their domestic form last year, they did finish something like 17 points behind Barcelona in the league. They obviously got up for the big games in the Champions League. Is there a sense that maybe, especially when you take Ronaldo out of the team, that what is left behind is a team that isn't well set up to go for a big 40, 50 games a season?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, and I'm sorry to Nathan for being rude. I am boorish. It's a fact. You're right in that. I think you've put a more subtle and colourful tone on what I was arguing. The team isn't particularly well set up. There has been a strategy about the squad recently whereby they've bought a huge number of either teenaged or early 20-year-old players, predominantly Spanish. It's an idea that, as an outside appreciator of football, I really quite like. And I hope that Llorente and Vallejo and Ceballos and Rodrigo and Vinicius will succeed. In terms of, did you say getting up for the Champions League? Because if so, I think that was right. There's a jag needed. There are certain players who don't hide in the league, but get bored. And it's a subconscious thing, and it marks down part of the greatness of the post-Guardiola era at Barcelona, where the players on a bad pitch, on a wet, windy day, against an ugly, bruising team that kicked and ran, or against a smaller, supposedly, team with a really clever coach, Barcelona found a way and kept finding a way. That's why they've been repeat champions of Spain so often. Madrid, and I don't in any way abuse them or target them for this, because I think it's involuntary. There are significant players in that squad who, when they hear the Champions League anthem, it's Pavlovian. They cannot but help producing. And showbiz is like that. They are a bunch of showbiz players. And the reason that we're in love with showbiz is that it entertains us. Curtain rises, people perform, and when the curtain goes down, they take their makeup off. They're ordinary. And in league terms, that's what Real Madrid have been. Nobody has again, applied a developed philosophy to try and change that, because it's bloody marvellous to win the Champions League 3 times in a row when nobody's ever retained it before. It's an extraordinary feat. And what they've proven is that if you don't have an abiding, guiding, well-thought-out strategy, then you continue in the same line and you appoint a coach. Lopetegui's the wrong one. He was available. George Mendes suggested him. You don't like him, you sack him and you move on. I said Florentino Perez is a hirer and a firer.
What would be a tipping point for this to go one way or the other? Like, there was a headline the other day that he was going to be given until the Clásico, which makes sense. If you're like, if he gets through the international break, you may as well at least go and see what happens in the Clásico. And the fact that Barcelona aren't running away with the league after 8 games, then there's been no significant ground lost to your main rival. As was saying there, we got the headline from Monday saying that he's got as far as the Clásico and that's it. And like, it's very early days. So, but if he was to lose a couple of games in between and lose the Clásico, that's it. It's done.
No, for example, if you want to make comparisons, at this stage, Rafa Benítez I think was undefeated at 18 points, significantly better in all departments than Lopetegui is right now, yet by January he was sacked. A year ago, as you point out, Ger, under Zidane, although they were flaccid in the league, they'd lost, 7 points at home to Levante, Valencia and Real Betis. They were about a year ago to get taught a football lesson over 2 games, even though one was a draw, by Tottenham Hotspur, and they were about to go and perform in Girona a year ago under Zidane, as they did at Alaves. And yet, right now, today, after 8 games in the league, they were 3 points and 3 goals better off under Zidane, went on to win the European Cup. When they began this season against Getafe, against Girona, against Roma, there was verve. Those same papers that you've been reading in Spain and quoting were drooling. I mean, drooling in joy. The adjectival clauses were tantric. They went on and on and on about how sexy Lopetegui's football was. I sat next to a pundit on a TV show saying, this is the best football that's ever been played under Florentino Perez. And now, 3 weeks later, everybody in those same papers says, rubbish, let's sack him, this is disgraceful. There are problems. Lopetegui, in my view, might not be the man who can solve them. He doesn't have, in personal terms, the Zidane touch, who could light up training sessions, light up players' imaginations, not by being Zidane, but because, as well as being a football genius, he's brilliant man-to-man. I'm not convinced Lopetegui is brilliant man-to-man. Might he get something out of this season? Yes. Is he the right man for Real Madrid in the long term? No. Will he last beyond this season? Definitely not. And right now, about Lopetegui, do we care? Apart from the personal thing about whether he makes it to the end of the season or not, I don't. My interest is based upon what will Real Madrid do as an institution, who will come in and guide them in terms of the squad, what has happened to Sergio Ramos, what has happened to Benzema, how quickly can they get Carvajal and Marcelo and Isco fit, at which point it's like, you know, a jigsaw that you take all the pieces, instead of working them out one by one, you throw them up in the air and say, how are we now? And that's Madrid for you.
Just to finish up, Graham, there was one fan poll I saw this week that suggested that Real Madrid fans would like to see Eden Hazard sign for the club in January and that they can't possibly afford to wait until next summer. I've got a couple of issues with the Eden Hazard situation, and I'm not sure if you'd agree with them. First of all, I think the fact that he scored so many goals this season is sort of covering up the sort of view in which Eden Hazard is viewed positionally, that a lot of Madrid fans will see him as the answer to their goal-scoring problems, but in actual fact, he might get in the way perhaps of Asensio and Isco. And then the other issue I have, and it's quite an obvious one, is that you might have to pay €150 million for the guy. Do Real Madrid have that money? Have they abandoned the Galactico policy? Or would that be a sort of panic button pushing moment if they did sign Hazard for that sort of money?
It's a beautiful question. You obviously know your football and your Real Madrid football very well indeed. Before I answer, would you ever give Ger a little back rub there? Those shoulders are hurting him badly. There was a wee stretch there and I thought I heard something was going to go pop.
Crack.
Look, I like everything you said about Eden Hazard. It's patently clear that whether you rate him, you know, top 5 or top 10 in the world, he's extraordinarily skilled, athletic, and he's declared an interest that he has wanted to go to Madrid, and that before he resigns, although he's extraordinarily personally happy under a coach at Chelsea who I know from first-hand experience, talking to 2 players there, has done a Zidane thing, revitalises them. Before we simply talk about the style of football at Chelsea, one-on-one, this Italian coach has lit a candle in the brains of some of these players who are loving daily work, loving the way they're asked to play. That might influence Hazard. But taking your idea and applying that litmus test to Hazard with Real Madrid, you're absolutely right. If he signs Asensio and Isco, will be prejudiced, and you would think that you shouldn't have all 3 of them in the same team, because albeit great players can play together, positionally there's a problem there. And if you have all 3 of them, your idea is to work out how to make them all in the same 11. I don't think it happens. And your financial question, and this is important, one of the reasons that Florentino Perez has invested so little in the market over the recent years And one of the reasons that he's applying what looks like a great philosophical idea to sign young players, and he's talked about it regularly, we must continue to buy the cream of. He's investing in youth, so he's cutting his outlay so that if Neymar can be bought, they will buy him. And if Neymar becomes available, Eden Hazard will be tossed aside like some forgotten umbrella that once was useful when it was raining. But when the sun shines, Florentino will be playing kissy-kissy with Neymar if there's any way he can get him to the club and out of Paris Saint-Germain. So good luck, Eden Hazard. If you go to Real Madrid, you will look fabulous. You will probably win more trophies than you do at Chelsea. I think statistically that's a decent argument. But if Neymar comes on the market, you'll be left behind in the rush.
Graham, great stuff. Thanks a million. Cheers.
Cheers, fellas.